Hi there. It's March the 25th, and we are continuing our journey in Luke. We are continuing from Luke chapter 6, verse 39, and we're going through to Luke 7 and verse 11. So at the end of chapter 6 here, as we're reading, Jesus speaks in contrasts. Luke tells us that he's teaching in what the Greek calls parabole, which is what we would call parable, but actually this is more like the Hebrew understanding of a mashal. The proverbs in the Old Testament are called the mashalim. And Jesus is very much giving wisdom sayings. And these wisdom sayings tend to have contrasting elements to them, things that balance. So the first thing Jesus says is about the teacher and the student. And he says, if you haven't got a good teacher, if your teacher is blind, he's not going to be able to bring light and insight to the student. The student can't be better than the teacher. So he says that there needs to be good teaching put into the student so that the student is perfected, because the student can't be better than the teacher. He then talks about the need to look at ourselves before we judge others. He uses this picture of the log in the eye and the splinter or the speck in the other person's eye. So he's saying it's too easy for us to look at the speck in another's eye and miss the fact that there's a whacking great log sticking out of our own eye. It's rather a comical picture here. Jesus kind of overstates it, because you obviously couldn't get a log in your eye, but he's using a very rabbinical way of looking at things here. Jesus also wants to contrast the good and the bad fruit of trees. He wants to say good tree produces good fruit, a bad tree produces bad fruit. And he says this is, again, demonstrated by how people live their lives and how they behave, how their conduct is, and how much attention they take to character building and formation, to the formation of their lives. And so again, he contrasts the wise man and the foolish man. The wise man who builds his house with rock foundations, who goes down deep, who takes his time, and when the waves come against it, when the storms come against this life, it is well founded and well established, and it stands. Whereas the foolish man that is contrasted with doesn't bother with foundations, builds on the sand, and when the waves and when the storms come, they just knock down this building and it leaves him with catastrophic results. Great is the fall of it, the scripture says. Then in the beginning of chapter 7, we come to a very interesting story about a centurion. Now, Jesus actually, Jesus shows here that he isn't against those who are beyond the pale of Israel. And it seems here this centurion is a God-fearer. He's provided finance to build the synagogue. He cares, he loves the Jewish people. Now just note here, Luke is telling us something here that's quite interesting to follow. This is a centurion he's speaking of. It's someone who's in the Roman occupation army, but there are other centurions, excuse me, that Luke will bring before us later. So there's a centurion who speaks of the death of Jesus, of him being the Son of God at Calvary. So the centurion makes an appearance again. And this is significant because in Acts chapter 10, which Luke also writes later, one of the first Gentiles, the Gentile who is instrumental in inviting the gospel to be spoken to the Gentile, to his fellow Gentiles, is Cornelius, who is a centurion of the Italian cohort in Caesarea. So it's almost as though Luke is introducing this here. Here's a centurion, here is a member of the Roman occupying forces who is not seen as beyond the pale, who Jesus connects with. Now, he connects with him, interestingly enough, through Jewish messengers. So the Jewish messengers are coming and they are speaking on behalf of the centurion whose servant is sick. And then Jesus is on his way to the centurion's house. But then the centurion sends to Jesus and says, no, don't come to my house. I'm not worthy that you should come under my roof. And he says, don't come to my house. All you need to do is to speak the word, because I know that you have influence, you have power, you have the authority to do this. Because I know what authority is like. I've been given authority myself, and I can say do this and do that, and it's done. And he trusts Jesus' word. He says, I don't have to have the personality, I don't have to have the person come, I don't have to have the celebrity come to my house. I know it's enough that he speaks, and I trust his word. And Jesus, it says, is amazed at his faith. He says, I haven't found faith like this in Israel. Now, note that Jesus is kind of paving the way for what comes later, that there will be those of faith, there will be those of great faith, beyond the scope of just the people of God that he has called beyond Israel. This covenant, this love that God has for people is going to extend beyond Israel itself in later times. Have a very good March the 25th.